Imagine this, you're seated in the plush comfort of first class, but when nature calls, you're told no. For one black woman, this wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was the start of something much bigger. After being denied access to the restroom, her patience snapped, and what happened next will leave you stunned. Within minutes, she took matters into her own hands, and in a surprising twist, ended up firing the entire crew. How did one moment of disrespect escalate so quickly? What led her to take such drastic action? In today's story, we dive into this unbelievable turn of events that shook the passengers and crew alike. Stay tuned to find out how this powerful moment of defiance unfolded and what the consequences were for everyone involved. You won't want to miss the rest of this jaw-dropping story. The woman, whose name we'll keep private for now, had been looking forward to a smooth flight, nothing out of the ordinary. She had settled into her first-class seat, enjoying the luxury and the quiet. But when the urge to use the restroom hit, she wasn't prepared for what came next. The flight attendants, instead of offering assistance, coldly informed her that the restroom in first class was reserved for the crew. She was asked to wait for the one in the back. Confused and frustrated, she politely insisted, explaining that she couldn't hold it. Yet, the response was dismissive, even bordering on condescending. To her, it felt like a clear case of discrimination. But it wasn't until she stood up to challenge them that the real drama began to unfold. She wasn't just going to accept it. Little did the crew know, they had just crossed a line they'd soon regret. As the woman stood there, heart racing, the reality of what was happening began to sink in. She had experienced racial bias before, but this time, it felt like it was happening in front of everyone, people who might not even care enough to notice. Her frustration grew, but so did her resolve. She wasn't going to let this slide, not after everything she had endured in her life. She turned her attention to the other passengers who were watching the exchange unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, while others seemed to barely notice. In the back of her mind, she wondered, was this flight crew just acting out of ignorance, or was there something deeper at play here? But the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. It wasn't just about the restroom anymore. It was about respect. It was about being seen as a human being. She quietly signaled for the flight attendants to approach. When they did, her voice was calm, but the power behind it was undeniable. "I'm not asking anymore," she said, her eyes locked with theirs. "I demand the restroom now." It was then that one of the attendants snapped, almost as if she'd been waiting for a fight. The tension in the cabin thickened. The woman's patience was gone, and the situation was about to go from uncomfortable to explosive. The flight attendants huddled together, speaking in hushed tones, trying to figure out how to handle the situation without making things worse. But what they didn't know was that the woman had already decided she wasn't just going to settle for an apology or a quick solution. She was going to make sure this moment was felt by everyone on board, and by the airline itself. In the blink of an eye, her decision was made. She was going to take action that would leave a lasting impact on the entire crew. The flight attendants returned, but their body language was different. Something in their eyes said they knew she wasn't going to back down. And just as she opened her mouth to speak again, the tension in the air was so thick you could almost taste it. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The woman's heart pounded in her chest as the flight attendants approached her once again. This time, their faces were harder to read, their eyes guarded, as if they had already prepared themselves for a confrontation. The tension in the air was almost unbearable. The other passengers were shifting in their seats, some glancing nervously toward the front of the cabin, while others pretended not to notice. But the woman felt every pair of eyes on her. It wasn't just about the restroom anymore. It was about dignity. It was about fighting for what she knew was right. She took a deep breath and stood up straighter, her body poised with determination. "I don't want an apology," she said, her voice steady but carrying. "I want the captain. I want to speak to the person in charge." She could feel the energy shift as her words hit the air. It wasn't just a request, it was a command. The flight attendants exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them nodded and left to fetch the captain. The woman remained standing, unmoving, as the minutes dragged on. Her mind raced with every possibility. Would they try to intimidate her into backing down? Would they offer some kind of lame excuse? Or would they see that she wasn't going to let this go? The door to the cockpit opened, and the captain stepped out, his expression unreadable. As he made his way toward her, the cabin grew eerily silent. You could hear a pin drop. All eyes were on him now. The flight attendants huddled near the back, whispering amongst themselves, probably hoping for a quick resolution to avoid a scene. But the woman wasn't looking for a resolution that came with conditions. She was looking for justice. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" the captain asked, his tone polite but clearly trying to gauge the situation. "Do you know what happened?" she replied, her voice unwavering. "I was told I couldn't use the restroom in first class, and not just that. I was made to feel less than, like I didn't deserve the same basic rights as everyone else." The captain's eyes flickered with something, regret, confusion, or maybe something else, but he didn't speak. She took a step closer to him, her words now sharper. "I'm done with this. I'm not just asking for an apology. I'm telling you, I'm taking this all the way, and that starts with you." At that moment, the woman realized just how far this would go. Her decision had been made, and she wasn't going to stop now. The captain's calm exterior began to crack, and the crew, standing quietly in the background, knew this wasn't going to end quietly. The stakes had just been raised, and the entire flight was about to feel the consequences. Just as the captain seemed to open his mouth to respond, the door to the cockpit suddenly burst open again. But this time it wasn't the flight attendants stepping in. A man in a sharp suit, who had been seated further back in the cabin, stood in the aisle. His voice, calm but filled with authority, rang out. "Is there a problem here, Captain?" The woman turned, momentarily stunned. The man wasn't a part of the crew, but he carried himself like he was. The captain hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected interruption. The man locked eyes with the woman for just a moment before turning back to the captain. "I think you need to reconsider the way you're handling this. This situation has gone." The man in the suit smirked, clearly expecting her to back down, but the woman wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't just standing up for herself, she was standing up for anyone who had ever been dismissed, ignored, or made to feel small. "You don't get to intimidate me," she said, her voice unwavering. "Not now, not ever." The captain, who had been quiet up until this point, seemed to finally realize that this wasn't just a minor disruption. This was becoming something bigger. He looked at the man in the suit, but the man only shrugged, as if to signal that the matter was out of his hands. The woman's eyes locked onto the captain. "I want the crew removed," she said, her words ringing through the cabin. "You're all complicit in this. I'll make sure everyone knows how you treated me." The tension in the air was unbearable, but the captain finally nodded, his face flushed with an emotion she couldn't quite place. Without a word, he turned and walked to the front of the plane, his voice crackling through the intercom moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that due to a passenger incident, the flight attendants are being replaced for the remainder of this flight." The passengers were stunned, some looking around in disbelief. But the woman didn't even flinch. She had won. She had taken control, made them see her, made them acknowledge the power of her voice. As the crew was escorted off the plane, she stood there, breathing deeply, her heart still racing but finally calm. Just as she thought it was over, just as she began to relax into the moment of victory, the man in the suit walked toward her again, his expression unreadable. This time, there was no smirk, no arrogance, only a cold professionalism. "You think this is over?" he asked, his voice low. She froze. The words, spoken without anger, still had a chilling effect. "You've won this round," he continued, his gaze piercing. "But there's a bigger picture here, one you don't see yet." Her blood ran cold as the realization hit her. The incident wasn't just about one flight, one crew, or even one woman's dignity. It was about something much more systemic, something far-reaching. The airline's treatment of its passengers, particularly those who were Black, had been under scrutiny for years. But this was bigger than that. The man was part of an operation, one that had been waiting for someone to make a move like hers. She had unknowingly stepped into a larger fight,